Boxing Day in the year 1900, a maritime relief crew stepped inside a locked, warm lighthouse 200 feet above the North Atlantic Ocean. The fire in the hearth had gone cold. A single chair lay overturned on the kitchen floor. The meal on the table was untouched, and all three experienced lighthouse keepers had vanished without a trace into the freezing winter mist. For over a century, people believed the men left behind a chilling logbook, seasoned seamen reduced to weeping and prayer during a catastrophic storm. There's just one problem. The official weather records show the sea was calm that week. So what actually happened on that rocky island? One man ran out into a freezing gale without his coat. We still don't fully know why. Tonight, we're going through the real case files, the verified history behind one of the ocean's most enduring mysteries. Wherever you're listening tonight, sitting up in the dark or lying back under warm blankets, it's time to let the noise of the world fade away. Notice how hard your mind has been working today. Give yourself permission right now to let that tension go. Feel your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften. Let the weight of your body sink into the surface beneath you. You're supported. You're safe. Outside, the rain falls steadily against the glass, a rhythmic sound that's been washing over the earth for thousands of years. The fire's burning low, casting warm amber light across the bookshelves and old leather bindings. You don't need to memorize any dates or solve any puzzles tonight. Just let the sound of my voice and the steady rain carry you across the water. Now let's open the first case file and step into the cold gray mist of December 1900. There's a profound solitude out in the deep waters of the North Atlantic. Sail 21 miles west of the Isle of Lewis, leaving the Scottish mainland behind, and you reach a rugged cluster of uninhabited rocks known as the Flannan Isles. For centuries, these jagged crags were the terror of sailors. Sheer cliffs rising out of churning swells, shrouded in fog, battered by relentless gales. Countless wooden ships were broken to splinters against those rocks. So in the late 19th century, the Northern Lighthouse Board did something remarkable. They built a 75-foot stone lighthouse on the highest peak of the islands, a towering rock called Eileen Moor. The lighthouse was built like a fortress. Its walls were made of massive stone blocks, designed to withstand the worst the Atlantic could throw at it. At its summit sat a state-of-the-art lamp, whose beam swept across 24 miles of dark ocean every night. 3 professional keepers maintained this beacon at all times. In December of 1900, those men were James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. Picture these men for a moment. Not as characters in a ghost story, but as real people who lived and worked in that quiet, isolated tower. James Ducat was the principal keeper, 43 years old, a veteran of the lighthouse service with 20 years guarding the Scottish coast. He was steady and reliable, with a wife and 4 children waiting for him on the mainland. He knew what his post meant. Sailors' lives depended on his lamp burning every night. Thomas Marshall was the second assistant keeper, age 28, quiet, disciplined, meticulous. His logbook entries were known for their precision. Donald MacArthur was the occasional keeper, aged 40, a powerfully built native of the Hebrides who'd spent his life on the water. was filling in for the permanent third keeper who was out on sick leave. MacArthur had seen every mood of the Atlantic and feared none of them. 3 experienced men, safe inside a warm stone tower with months of provisions, fresh water, coal, oil. Yet sometime between the evening of December 15th and the morning of December 26th, all 3 vanished into the sea, leaving behind an empty tower that would baffle investigators for over a century. The first sign of trouble came on the dark night of December 15th, 1900. An American steamer, the Arctur, was battling rough winter seas on its way to the port of Leith. As it passed Eileen Moore, the captain looked out for the familiar sweep of the lighthouse beam. There was nothing, only black, unbroken night. The lamp of Eileen Moore was dead. When the Arctur docked in Scotland 3 days later, the captain reported it. But severe winter storms made it impossible to send a relief vessel right away. It wasn't until the afternoon of December 26th, Boxing Day, that the Lighthouse tender ship, the Hesperus, finally broke through the swells and approached the island. Aboard was Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, come to rotate into duty and spend the holidays with his friends. He carried fresh mail, newspapers, and holiday provisions, in high spirits. But as the Hesperus dropped anchor in the gray bay, Moore and the crew noticed something wrong. Under normal protocol, the keepers would run up the relief flag the moment a ship arrived, then lower a boat and wait on the landing platform to help with supplies. Today the flagstaff stood bare. The landing platform was empty. No smoke rose from the chimney. The island sat in absolute silence. The captain sounded the ship's steam whistle, a deep blast that echoed off the cliffs and carried for miles. Nothing moved. No door opened. No hand waved from the gallery. With a sinking feeling, Joseph Moore climbed into a rowboat and was pulled through the surf to the landing dock. He leaped ashore and began the long climb up 200 feet of stone steps to the lighthouse. The wind whispered through the damp grass. With every step, Moore called out the names of his friends. James, Thomas, Donald. Only the cry of gulls and the crash of surf answered. At the compound wall, Moore found the iron gate closed and latched. He opened it, crossed the courtyard, and stood at the door of the keeper's living quarters. The door was unlocked. Moore stepped into the dim hallway. The air was freezing. A lighthouse normally full of warmth and the smell of burning coal now felt like an abandoned vault. The kitchen and living area were immaculate, but frozen mid-interruption. Plates set laid out on the table. A chair lay knocked backward on the floor, as if someone had leapt up in sudden urgency. The fire grate held only cold ash. It hadn't been lit in days. The beds were neatly made. Watches, pipes, and photographs sat undisturbed on the side tables. The clocks had wound down and stopped. Moore walked to the entrance closet, where the men stored their weatherproof coats and boots. 2 sets of oilskins were missing, Ducats and Marshalls. But the third set, MacArthur's, still hung neatly on its peg. That single detail sent a chill down Moore's spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. Lighthouse regulations were absolute. One man always had to stay inside to guard the beacon, and no experienced seaman would step onto those cliffs in a December gale without his coat and boots. Yet MacArthur's coat stayed indoors. Whatever happened on that island happened fast enough that MacArthur, a hardened veteran of the Hebrides, knocked his chair backward and ran out into a freezing storm in his shirt sleeves. Desperate for answers, Moore climbed the iron staircase to the lantern room. Everything here was in order too. The lenses polished, the oil fountains full. On the desk sat the Lighthouse logbook. If you've heard this story before, you've probably heard it told a certain way. Podcasts and articles have long claimed Moore found chilling entries written by Thomas Marshall. They claim the logbook said, December 12th, severe gale, never seen such a storm. James Ducat quiet, Donald MacArthur crying. And later, December 13th, storm continued through the night. Me, Ducat, and MacArthur prayed. And finally, on December 15th, storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. It's a dramatic picture. 3 brave men driven to tears and prayer by a supernatural storm. Except the weather records show the sea around the island was calm on December 12th and 13th. Here's where we separate fact from folklore. When maritime historians like Mike Dash examined the actual Northern Lighthouse Board records, they found the truth. Those entries about MacArthur crying and praying never existed. They were invented. 12 years after the disappearance, a poet named Wilfred Wilson Gibson wrote a dramatic piece called Flannan Isle. For artistic effect, he imagined the keepers weeping and praying and writing eerie last words. Newspapers and writers later copied his fiction and passed it off as historical fact. So what did the real logbook actually say? Superintendent Robert Muirhead reviewed the genuine log and confirmed the entries were routine. Weather observations, oil consumption, cleaning schedules, right up to the morning of December 15th. No tears, no prayers, no mysterious storm. The 3 keepers were doing their jobs with quiet professionalism, right up until the moment disaster struck. And knowing they were calm, capable men, not 3 people breaking down in terror, somehow makes their silent disappearance even more haunting. So if it wasn't a phantom storm or something supernatural, what actually lured 3 careful men out of a locked, fortified tower? Superintendent Muirhead conducted a physical inspection of the island in January of 1901. The eastern landing, where Moore had arrived, was untouched. But the western landing, a narrow cove exposed to the open Atlantic, told a different story. What he found there was hard to believe. Iron railings bolted deep into the rock had been wrenched loose and twisted like ribbons. A supply box, secured in a crevice over 100 feet above sea level, was smashed to splinters, its ropes and tools scattered across the cliff. A 2,000-pound boulder that had sat undisturbed on the landing since the lighthouse was built had been thrown more than 4 feet across the concrete. The turf on the cliff edges, 200 feet up, had been torn away clean, leaving bare rock. Muirhead stood at that cliff edge and pieced together what happened. On that afternoon, a real winter gale began to blow in from the west. James Ducat and Thomas Marshall put on their heavy oilskin coats and sea boots and walked down to the western landing platform to secure the mooring ropes and ensure the wooden supply box was lashed down before the brunt of the storm hit. While they were working on the exposed platform, the ocean produced what mariners call a rogue wave or a freak swell, a colossal wall of water rising over 100 feet out of the deep ocean, amplifying as it funneled into the narrow western cove. Up in the lighthouse, Donald MacArthur was inside the kitchen, perhaps preparing their evening meal. From the high window, he looked out and saw the monstrous wave surging toward the cliffs where his two comrades were working. In a surge of loyalty, he leapt to his feet, knocking his chair backward. He threw open the door without stopping for his coat and sprinted down 200 feet of stone steps to help. He arrived just as the colossal wave struck the cliffs. The water surged over 100 feet into the air, smashing the supply box, twisting the railings, and sweeping all three men off their feet in a fraction of a second, pulling them into the freezing Atlantic as the water pulled back. They didn't vanish into a curse. They died as heroes, trying to save each other. Their light still shines across the Hebrides today. But the rooms of Aileen Moore are silent now, filled only with the wind and the rain. The ocean is vast. It holds its secrets with a quiet, endless patience. The keepers of Aileen Moore have long since found their rest in those deep, quiet waters. They're not lost anymore, just part of the timeless history of the tide. As we close the file on the Flannan Isles, let that steady ocean breeze carry the last of the story away. Notice how still the room has become, how comfortable your body feels right now. Take a slow, deep breath in, filling your lungs with calm, quiet air. There's nowhere else you need to be tonight, nothing else to solve, just the sound of my voice and the rain. In a moment, we'll open a second file. We're going back even further this time, to a ship found drifting with no one aboard. You don't need to stay awake for it. You can just let the story float around you, like the rain against the glass. Whenever you're ready, let your eyelids feel heavy, and drift with me out onto the Atlantic once more. On the afternoon of December 5th, 1872, a British merchant ship called the Dei Grazia was crossing the Atlantic, roughly 600 miles east of the Azores. The weather was fair, light winds, gentle swells. Captain David Morehouse noticed a ship in the distance, moving strangely. He raised his spyglass. Her sails were set, but torn and hanging loose. She was yawing in the water, drifting with no clear direction. Morehouse signaled her with maritime flags. There was no response. He recognized her, the Mary Celeste, a vessel that had left New York 8 days ahead of his own ship, carrying Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, their young daughter, and a crew of 7. For Briggs to let his ship drift with torn sails in open water made no sense. He was one of the most careful captains on the Atlantic. Morehouse pulled his ship alongside and lowered a small boat. First Mate Oliver DeVoe called out as they approached. "Ahoy, Mary Celeste. Anyone aboard?" Only the creak of timbers and water slapping against the rudder answered. DeVoe grabbed the boarding ladder and pulled himself over the railing. DeVoe and his companions searched the ship cabin by cabin. The main deck was wet from sea spray, but the vessel was structurally sound. Near the stern, they found something odd. The ship's only lifeboat was gone, and the lines holding it hadn't snapped. They'd been deliberately cut loose. Why would Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and a crew of 7 leave a sound, floating ship? DeVoe went below deck. In the crew's quarters, everything in order. Sea chests untouched, no signs of struggle. The galley held 6 months of food and clean water, more than enough for the voyage. Then DeVoe entered Captain Briggs' cabin. The bed was made. On a small shelf sat a sewing machine, with Sarah's needlework still resting beside it, mid-stitch. Charts were scattered across the desk. The ship's log showed her last recorded position 10 days earlier, 500 miles back, near the Azores. Somehow, she'd sailed herself the rest of the way. Before leaving the cabin, DeVoe checked the captain's locker. The chronometer and the ship's papers were gone. Everything else, money, valuables, personal belongings, was untouched. DeVoe and a small crew sailed the Mary Celeste into the British port of Gibraltar for a formal inquiry. Just like the Flannan Isles, once the story reached newspapers in London and New York, the facts didn't stand a chance against the legend. For over a century, popular retellings claimed DeVoe found warm cups of tea and half-eaten meals still on the table, as if the crew vanished mid-breakfast. So what did the Gibraltar court actually find? DeVoe testified under oath. There was no warm tea, no half-eaten meal. There was no mutiny, no pirate attack, no violence of any kind. The court did a detailed examination of the ship's hull and cargo. Among 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, 9 were found completely empty. And unlike the rest of the cargo, bound in thick iron hoops, those 9 barrels were made of a more porous red oak, the kind known to leak. Combine that physical evidence with modern maritime science, and a clear picture emerges. Let's reconstruct that morning of November 25th, 1872. For several days, the Mary Celeste had been battling heavy squalls and humid weather below deck. That morning, Captain Briggs ordered the main cargo hatch opened, likely to check on those leaking alcohol barrels and clear built-up fumes. Picture his position. He's standing on a wooden ship carrying 1,700 barrels of flammable alcohol, some of them leaking vapor into the hold, in humid, unstable weather. Briggs didn't panic. He acted with discipline. He ordered the crew to lower the lifeboat as a precaution. To keep the lifeboat close, he had it tied to the Mary Celeste with a length of rope. Then he, his wife, his daughter, and the crew climbed in, staying roughly 100 feet behind their own ship, tethered, waiting for the danger to pass. Then the weather turned. A sudden winter squall swept across the water. The Mary Celeste, still under sail, lurched forward in the gust. The weight of a 100-foot wooden ship accelerating suddenly put a violent strain on that single tow rope. It snapped. Captain Briggs and his family sat helpless in an oarless lifeboat, watching their own ship sail away from them into the open Atlantic. The Mary Celeste didn't kill her crew. She simply sailed on without them, a ship still faithfully doing her job, long after the people who needed her were gone. Let that story settle for a moment. The Mary Celeste, still sailing on some quiet current in your mind. Notice your breathing again, slower now than when we started. There's one more file on the desk tonight. This one's different. No ship, no lighthouse. Just a man, a parachute, and $200,000 that vanished into a storm. You don't need to hold on to any of it. Just let the story drift by like the last one did. Whenever you're ready, let's open the last case file. On the afternoon of November 24th, 1971, a man in a dark suit, a black raincoat, and sunglasses walked up to the counter at Portland International Airport and bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. He paid cash, $20, and gave his name as Dan Cooper. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, average height, dark hair, calm and unremarkable. The flight attendants who later described him to a sketch artist struggled to find anything distinctive to say. He looked, in their words, like a businessman. Forgettable in every way except one. He boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305, took seat 18C near the back of the cabin, and ordered a bourbon and soda while the plane taxied out. There were only 36 other passengers on board, along with 2 pilots, a flight engineer, and 3 flight attendants. Not long after takeoff, he handed a folded note to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. She assumed it was a phone number, the kind of thing passengers sometimes slip to attractive crew members, and tucked it into her pocket without reading it. He leaned over and told her quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." She read it. Then he opened his briefcase just enough for her to see the inside. A tangle of wires, a battery, and several red cylinders arranged in neat rows. She would later testify she had no reason to doubt it was real. His demands were specific and calmly delivered. $200,000 in unmarked, non-sequential $20 bills. 4 parachutes, 2 of them primary rigs, 2 of them backups, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refill the aircraft. The airline agreed to everything immediately. Gathering that much cash on short notice takes time, so the flight circled over Puget Sound for nearly 2 hours, while the other passengers sat, unaware anything unusual was happening. The captain told them there was a minor mechanical problem, and the cabin stayed calm the entire time. When the plane finally landed in Seattle, Cooper kept his side of the arrangement. He released all 36 passengers and 2 of the flight attendants in exchange for the money and parachutes. Delivered to the aircraft exactly as he'd requested, packed in a canvas bank bag. Then he gave the remaining crew new instructions. "Fly toward Mexico City," he said, "but keep the landing gear down. The wing flaps lowered 15 degrees, and the cabin unpressurized the entire way. Fly low, below 10,000 feet, and slow, no faster than around 200 miles an hour." The flight crew, all experienced pilots, understood immediately what those specifications meant. Nobody flies a commercial jet that low and slow to reach Mexico. He wasn't planning to stay aboard for the whole trip. He was planning to jump. Somewhere over the dense, forested mountains of southern Washington, in near freezing temperatures and pouring rain, with visibility close to zero. Cooper lowered the aircraft's aft stairway, the same exterior staircase normally used for passengers to disembark on the tarmac. At around 8:13 that night, the crew in the cockpit felt the plane suddenly pitch and buck. The kind of movement that happens when a significant weight shifts near the tail. That was the only physical sign that Cooper had gone. When the aircraft landed in Reno for refueling, agents searched it immediately. Cooper was gone. So was the money, the parachutes he'd chosen to take, and his briefcase. He'd left behind his black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, and 8 cigarette butts in the ashtray of his seat. Nothing else. No trace of him was found that night, or in the days that followed. The FBI launched what became one of the largest manhunts in its history, eventually involving hundreds of soldiers from Fort Lewis, FBI agents, and civilian volunteers who spent weeks combing through the forest on foot, by helicopter, and later by riverboat along the Columbia. They found nothing. No body, no parachute, no scrap of the $200,000. For nearly 9 years, the case produced no physical evidence at all. For more than 50 years, this case has produced more competing theories than almost any other unsolved mystery in America. Some investigators believed Cooper had to have military parachute training, since jumping from a commercial jet at night in a storm, wearing a business suit and dress shoes, should have been close to impossible to survive. Others focused on specific named suspects, a drifter and merchant marine named Kenneth Christensen, who some relatives believed matched the sketch, a Vietnam veteran and skilled parachutist named Robert Rackstraw, investigated for years before being cleared, a small-time criminal named Richard McCoy, who carried out a nearly identical hijacking just 5 months later and was caught, though his details never fully lined up with the original case. The FBI formally investigated over 800 suspects over the decades. None of the physical evidence, fingerprints, the tie, the cigarette butts, ever definitively matched any of them. Here's what has actually been verified. In February of 1980, a young boy named Brian Ingram was digging in the sand along the banks of the Columbia River at a spot called Tina Bar when he uncovered 3 decaying, rubber-banded bundles of cash. The bills were 20s, and when FBI technicians matched the serial numbers against their records, they confirmed it. This was part of Cooper's ransom money. Just under $6,000 of it, disintegrating in the riverbank, roughly 8 miles from where investigators had calculated Cooper would have landed, based on the plane's speed, altitude, and the moment the stairway opened. That discovery remains the only physical trace of the ransom money ever recovered. It told investigators the cash had ended up in the river at some point, likely buried or washed there over the years. But it never explained what happened to the man who was carrying it out of the plane. Did he survive the jump, land somewhere in that forest, and vanish before searchers arrived? Did he drown in the Columbia, or die on impact in terrain so dense his body was simply never found? Did he walk away entirely and live out the rest of his life quietly, under a different name, never spending the rest of the money for fear of being traced? The FBI formally closed the active investigation in 2016, redirecting its resources toward more solvable cases. But the file was never marked solved, and it never will be, unless new evidence surfaces. D.B. Cooper remains the only unsolved commercial aircraft hijacking in the history of American aviation. No body, no parachute, no confirmed identity. Just a little over $194,000 still unaccounted for somewhere out there. And a man who stepped out of an airplane door into the freezing dark and was never seen again. 3 case files closed for tonight. A lighthouse on a rugged island. A ship left to drift on its own tide. A parachute over a forest that's never been fully searched. Some mysteries get solved by patient hands and old paperwork. Others just fade quietly into history, unanswered, and the world keeps turning anyway. And now, as our story comes to its close, the fire in our cabin has burned down to soft, glowing embers. The shadows have lengthened across the wooden beams of the ceiling. Outside, the storm has softened into a gentle, steady rain against the glass. Listen to the sound of those drops, each one washing away the thoughts of the day. You've done everything you needed to do today. Your mind is quiet. Your body is heavy, warm, completely relaxed. There's nothing left to question, nothing left to solve. Just the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing, rising and falling. Let yourself sink deeper into the pillow now. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. Safe, comfortable, at peace. Rest your eyes. Listen to the rain. Drift away into the quiet